Yes. So, I mean, you already see that in the counterterrorism space. And look, state-to-state conflict is not gone away from the world. So, but one thing that networked computers, networked, cheap air travel, right? International air travel, all these, telecommunications, all these things have given us is the ability of very small groups of individuals to exert force against very powerful states. And, that's the subject of Philip Bobbitt's book, Terror and Consent. And it's also the subject of this guy's book, which is an excellent it's a great little read, actually. The converse of that is that groups of people whom we have traditionally thought of in the as criminals, we now think of in a more military context. And part of that is because they're acting like it. That is, they do things that we think of as acts of war. But part of it is not that. Part of it is that they act from places that we cannot project power in the form of the criminal justice apparatus. So, in order to arrest somebody, you need to have some degree of physical control and jurisdiction, right? If you think about it in legal terms, the concept is jurisdiction over the place in which they're operating, right? So if somebody is in Yemen, in a part of Yemen that is not really a governed space, well, you can issue criminal process to, an arrest warrant. And you may be able to send some FBI agents to Yemen, but there's kind of a limit to what you can do. There are this group of people that are, kind of waging war against us and who are in physical locations in which the only plausible way to reach them is through instrumentalities we tend to associate with the projection of military force rather than the projection of criminal justice force. And so all of that does tend to cause a convergence of military and criminal authorities in ways that even 25 years ago would have been very surprising. There's been a lot of talk about that, but the reality has not gone in that direction, though there's been, it's been talked about a lot. So there's been no act of military force worth talking about on U.S. soil in connection with counterterrorism, right? There's been 3 people, one of whom was actually captured abroad, so only 2 people who were captured domestically who were treated outside of the criminal justice system. Both of them were returned to the criminal justice system after some period in military custody because it kind of didn't work.
So
Padilla and Almari. So both of them are now in federal prison. And the Obama administration has made clear that it, at least, will never will use the criminal justice system exclusively for domestic captures. So, I think and I doubt very strongly that any subsequent administration, at least in the near term, without some change in legal structure, would revisit that. So, I think what you can say is the Bush administration had a relatively brief experiment with treating the domestic space as battlefield. It was brief and very tentative. It migrated away from it. The Obama administration has shown no interest in that as a premise. And yes, there is some open legal question as to whether there's legal space in which to do it. I think we're moving away from that, actually. I think we're moving toward a model in which we use criminal justice authorities pretty exclusively domestically. We use military authorities and covert intelligence authorities very aggressively beyond the shores of the United States, but not in allied countries with functioning legal systems. So in other words, if you're attacking the United States from Afghanistan, we're going to blow you up if we can. And we may even do that if you're a U.S. citizen. But if you're in Paris and you're attacking the United States, we're going to pick up the phone and call the French police and ask them to arrest you. And so a big part of the regime, broadly speaking, is a question of where you are physically and what the degree of capacity that we have to exert law enforcement authorities in that jurisdiction looks like. Now, there are areas where the convergence is more complicated even than that, though, because, when you look at what U.S. troops were doing in parts of Iraq during the surge, in parts of Afghanistan now, there are certain law enforcement elements of that. So it's not just, the government using military and covert intelligence powers that we associate with warfare to go after people whom we associate with, as we think would traditionally have thought of as criminals. It's also using the military to do things like, policing neighborhoods, right, that we would traditionally think of as, a whole lot of the coin strategy involves delivering law enforcement services, right? And so it's also using the military in ways that kind of look a little bit like law enforcement. Right. No, I think, that's all correct. There is a convergence going on both internationally and to some degree domestically. And look, the issue that you describe about, scanning license plates, that's actually a different issue, right? Because license plate numbers are public, right? They're not. And so the question there, and it's actually a question that is a recurring theme throughout the sort of domestic data issues, is how do we really feel about efficiency, right? Nobody doubts that the police have the authority, famous case, Terry versus Ohio, right? Stop you on the street with reasonable suspicion, kind of do a brief, check who you are, brief search, right? Nobody doubts that they have the authority to do that. Nobody doubts that they have the authority to look at your license plate, see, who is this guy parked in this weird angle? Wonder if he's wanted for anything, right? Nobody doubts that there's but what if you can snap a picture of everybody who goes down the street and the facial recognition software is actually really, really good, right? And so by walking down the street, which is not a private act, right? Which is not something that we traditionally associate with you having a lot of privacy rights associated with. You're exposing yourself to serial criminal investigation in 1,000 jurisdictions, all of which can submit your photo for the things that you're wanted for, right? Or what if by driving down the street, again, not a private act, there's perfect efficiency in knowing what your license, what inquiries your license plate is connected with somehow. I think we haven't really thought through the question of how we feel about efficiency. It's a question that databases have really put on the table, where whole categories of public data about you are now public in a way that, somebody used to have to go to the courthouse and look you up individually. It was all there if they wanted to know it, but it wasn't perfectly accessible to anyone at any time. And now this stuff is. And I think that that's actually a category. To go back to our earlier, our category question about, do we feel the same way about what information should be public, what information should be protected, if we know that the processing efficiency of that information is near perfect, that anything that's public is going to be available to law enforcement, but also to Choice Point, right, to companies that specialize this, but also to me, right, that, I, meet somebody professionally, and I can stalk them and I'll find out who his girlfriend is, if you find out all kinds of information just casually looking people up. You meet somebody, you look him up on Facebook, you find out all kinds of things about him. And that's just the information that he doesn't really mind if you know, right? Then you go to the information aggregators. Some of them will charge you money, some of them won't. You can look up his criminal record. A lot of people actually have them, and a lot of good people actually have them. And I'm not saying what the right answer to that question is, but there is a question of, do we think that the same amount of data should be public if the consequences of public means perfect efficiency of access to anybody who wants it? And criminal records is a good example of that. So this is the prototypical public information. But if somebody has a record in 3 different states, it used to be a little bit of an exercise to track down, where has Ben Wittes been arrested. It's not now you can just get somebody's rap sheet really, really easily. And, that does have consequences for people.